What on earth are you doing? When I went to visit Luke in the hospital, I couldn't believe what I saw. Luke wasn't resisting. In fact, he was responding to her kiss. It was unmistakably a scene of infidelity.
Oh, so you found out. Spying on us like that is such a bad habit.
So, you caught us. Well, you and I are practically strangers now. Don't bother contacting me while I'm still in the hospital.
When confronted about his affair with Jessica, Luke didn't apologize. Instead, he arrogantly demanded a divorce from me. Fine, I understand. I no longer had any love for Luke. I picked up the divorce papers that had fallen to the floor and left the hospital room. 3 days later, I started receiving numerous calls from Luke. My voicemail was filled with his messages.
Please, I'm begging you, if you don't help me,
Luke had completely changed his attitude, pleading for my help. He must have never imagined that the woman he had looked down on and mocked would hold his life in her hands. However, unable to forgive Luke for his betrayal with Jessica, I ignored his messages and refused to answer the calls. Luke would end up regretting his actions deeply. My name is Michelle, and I am a stay-at-home wife. My husband, Luke, used to be my colleague at the company where I worked. Although we occasionally talked about work, we were just acquaintances until we happened to sit next to each other at a company party. That night, we hit it off, started dating, and eventually got married. I've always been a shy person, and I was hesitant about starting a relationship with Luke. The one who encouraged me was my sister, Jessica. Jessica got married before me and became a great confidant whenever I struggled with relationship issues. When Luke proposed, I was unsure, but Jessica gave me the nudge I needed. Thanks to her support, my reserved nature didn't hold me back, and I successfully tied the knot with Luke. Our newlywed life started off happily. Luke is cheerful and outgoing, and he often took me to various places to make me smile. He treated me to dinners at fancy restaurants, gave me gifts on special occasions, and his thoughtfulness deeply impressed me. However, Luke's major flaw gradually began to come to light. It was his sense of money management. One day, a large bill from the credit card company arrived. I was shocked when I saw the statement. It was a bill that exceeded our household's monthly income. Of course, I knew I hadn't spent that much. When I asked Luke about it, his response was vague.
did I really spend that much?
Was it fraud? Suspecting a crime, I consulted the credit card company and the police. However, the investigation revealed that Luke himself had made the charges. What on earth is going on? Why didn't you just tell me the truth when I asked? Shocked by the lies, I confronted Luke harshly. But Luke just laughed it off, not seeming to take the situation seriously.
Well, if I told you the truth, you'd just get mad. Don't worry, I'll make more money to cover it.
Make more money? The bill is more than your income. At this rate, we'll be in debt, not saving anything.
Stop nagging. I should be able to spend the money I earn however I want. Why don't you go back to work too?
We talked about this before. We decided I'd quit my job and focus on getting pregnant because we wanted kids.
Did I say that? Well, since we don't have enough money now, you'll just have to work. You can't expect to sit around while I do all the hard work.
A few years after marrying Luke, I had left my job. We had found out that having children wouldn't be easy for us. We underwent tests at the hospital, but they couldn't determine which of us was the cause of the infertility. However, we were advised that regular checkups would be beneficial if we wanted to have children, so I decided to leave my job. Yet now, Luke seemed to have either forgotten or ignored this entirely and insisted that I return to work. From the start, I was the only one consistently attending fertility treatments, while Luke often skipped appointments, using his busy work schedule as an excuse. Our discussions always ended in a stalemate, and I eventually returned to work. Since my previous workplace didn't have any openings, I started a part-time job nearby. My income helped cover our monthly deficits, but with the cost of fertility treatments, I began to wonder what I was working for. Unaware of how I felt, Luke continued his reckless spending. Whenever I suggested cutting back on expenses, he'd snap at me, telling me to stay out of his business. Day by day, my distrust in Luke grew. I couldn't help but feel confused and disheartened by how much he had changed from the person I dated. The problems didn't end there. Luke's parents, Ashley and David, who live in a rural area, were also a source of stress for me. They often visited our home unannounced and made insensitive comments.
So, no kids yet? It's been quite a while since you got married. There must be something wrong with your body.
Ashley constantly blamed me for not being able to have children, making snide remarks like this.
With a daughter-in-law who's such a defective product, we shouldn't have let them get married. What a disappointment.
David was also harsh, criticizing me in a condescending tone.
She's not cooperating in trying to have kids.
The doctor said the cause of our infertility was unknown. So, it wasn't necessarily my fault that we couldn't have children. However, instead of defending me, Luke sided with his parents, blaming me for the situation.
If you have time to start a part-time job, you should focus on having kids. Waiting until you're older will only make it harder.
If you manage the household budget properly, you wouldn't need to work. Don't tell me you're wasting Luke's salary.
Ashley and David took full advantage of my silence, continuing to berate me until they left. It's your reckless spending, isn't it? Why don't you admit it's your fault?
If I said that, Mom and Dad would just worry even more. I can't do that.
Luke didn't apologize. Instead, he acted as if he was in the right, snorting arrogantly. I'm going to fertility treatments. The cause might be on your end too. So why am I the only one being blamed?
I have my pride, you know. As my wife, you should understand that much.
No matter how much I tried to explain, Luke wouldn't listen. The thought of divorce briefly crossed my mind when Luke suddenly grimaced in pain.
My stomach hurts.
Clutching his abdomen, he broke out in a cold sweat and collapsed to the floor. What's wrong? Are you okay? Is your stomach hurting?
Please, call an ambulance. Hurry.
Seeing the desperation on his face, I realized it was serious. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. Hello, this is an emergency. My husband, Luke, is suddenly in severe pain. The ambulance arrived quickly after my call. Groaning in pain, Luke was carried out on a stretcher by the paramedics. I rode with him to the hospital. The diagnosis revealed that Luke's unhealthy lifestyle, including excessive sugar and alcohol intake, had led to impaired kidney function. This time, his kidneys were inflamed, causing the sudden and intense pain.
We'll admit him for now. There's a risk his condition could worsen due to the medication's side effects, so we'll monitor him for a while.
Even though we had been arguing, I was genuinely worried about Luke's sudden illness. During his observation period in the hospital, I decided to visit him every day. However, this hospital stay led me to uncover a horrifying truth. A few days had passed since Luke collapsed. That day, I finished work earlier than usual and arrived at the hospital much earlier than my usual visiting time. When I approached his room, I noticed the door was slightly ajar, and I could hear hushed voices inside. There shouldn't be any tests at this time, so maybe a nurse is checking on him? But I had a bad feeling, so I peeked through the small opening. To my shock, my sister Jessica was there. And unbelievably, she was straddling Luke, who was sitting on the bed, and they were kissing. Luke wasn't resisting. In fact, he was responding to her kiss. It was unmistakably a scene of infidelity. What on earth are you doing? When I burst into the room and yelled, Jessica looked shocked to see me and quickly jumped off Luke.
What's wrong, Michelle? Why are you yelling all of a sudden? You scared me.
Don't play dumb. I saw what you were doing just now.
Saw what? I have no idea what you're talking about.
Jessica was clearly determined to feign ignorance. I saw you and Luke kissing. What's going on here? At my words, both of them looked flustered. Realizing they couldn't talk their way out of this, Jessica finally spoke after a brief silence.
Oh, so you found out. Spying on us like that is such a bad habit.
You're admitting to having your affair? Jessica, you have a family. What were you thinking?
Did it really take you this long to notice? You're so clueless. Yes, Luke and I are in that kind of relationship. Sorry.
Luke, is this true?
Well, now that the cat's out of the bag, I'll admit it. Sorry, but I've been attracted to Jessica ever since I first met her. I've always preferred older women.
They both smirked, watching my reaction. How long has this been going on?
Oh, it started when I happened to visit your house while you were out. We got to talking, and things just clicked.
Jessica admitted this brazenly, without a hint of remorse.
Luke is such a thoughtful guy, you know. He gives me tasteful gifts and knows all the best restaurants. Honestly, someone as plain as you doesn't deserve him. I'll take him off your hands.
Wait, is that why the credit card bills were so high? I can't believe this.
Well, yeah, pretty much. Am not the type to skimp on dates, you know. Sorry.
I had been working hard to support our household finances. But all the money I earned had been spent by Luke and Jessica for their selfish indulgences. Realizing they had both been deceiving me all along, anger began to boil within me.
By the way, I heard you're having trouble having kids. How sad. It's your fault, isn't it?
Jessica said this with a smug smile. Wait a minute. Did you actually tell her that? I can't believe it. Luke had shared our private struggles with Jessica. Not only had he told Ashley and David, but it seemed he had also spread the idea that our infertility was solely my fault to Jessica. The mocking tone in Jessica's voice only fueled my anger further.
Oh, was I not supposed to say that? My bad. But it's true, isn't it? It's your fault we can't have kids.
That's enough. I can't believe you two anymore. Realizing how futile it was to reason with them, I gave up trying to communicate. These two are clearly missing a screw somewhere. They betray their family without even batting an eye. Jessica, you're married too. What are you planning to do by having an affair with Luke?
Don't worry. I plan to get divorced. Luke's a much better man. My husband isn't bad, but he's just boring.
This is unbelievable. You're leaving your husband for Luke?
Don't make it sound so bad. If I had met Luke before you did, he would have chosen me for sure.
Well, that's about right. I've been meaning to bring this up, and now's a good opportunity.
With that, Luke threw something at me. It was a divorce agreement, already filled out.
Fill that out and submit it, will you?
Don't contact me at all while I'm in the hospital. From now on, you and I are strangers.
Fine. I understand. I picked up the divorce papers from the floor and left the hospital room without saying another word. I knew there was no point in talking to them anymore. Straight from the hospital, I headed to submit the divorce papers. Our marriage had never been particularly happy, but we had once chosen to build a life together because we cared for each other. I never imagined it would end so abruptly and coldly. Carrying a heavy heart, I returned alone to an empty home. 3 days later, my phone started ringing repeatedly with calls from Luke. Even though he told me not to contact him while he was in the hospital, what's going on? Thinking it couldn't be anything good, I decided to ignore the calls. However, after ignoring the calls, the hospital where Luke was admitted called me instead. Even though we were getting divorced, from the hospital's perspective, I was still his spouse. Something must have happened to Luke. Hello. I reluctantly answered the call, and the nurse on the line informed me that Luke's condition had worsened. The side effects of the medication he was taking were severe, and he would need surgery in a few days. The surgery would require a blood transfusion, but Luke had one significant problem. His blood type was rare. It was not only difficult to source, but the blood bank had very limited stock. If the surgery had been planned in advance, it wouldn't have been an issue, but for an emergency surgery, they didn't have enough blood available. At the moment, only one person was a viable donor for Luke. That person was me. When Luke was admitted to the hospital, I was called in by the doctor and asked to undergo a blood test. The test was to check if my blood was compatible with Luke's, and as it turned out, by sheer coincidence, it was a perfect match.
This is incredibly lucky.
The doctor had said with excitement, but before I could share this information, I had discovered Luke's affair with Jessica and never mentioned it to him. Finding another compatible donor at this point would be nearly impossible. That's why they were reaching out to me now. The doctor explained that I was the only potential donor, and perhaps Luke finally realized the gravity of his mistakes. My phone kept ringing, and my voicemail filled with his messages. Luke was desperately pleading with me to donate blood. However, I remembered that he had explicitly told me not to contact him. The hospital urged me to come immediately, but I came up with an excuse and refused. The calls from Luke still haven't stopped. On top of that, Jessica has started calling me as well. Their voicemails are filled with angry outbursts.
Hey, why aren't you answering your phone? Get to the hospital now.
What are you doing? He's your husband. Are you going to let him die?
Even after hearing their voicemails, I had no intention of going to the hospital. I wasn't kind enough to save someone who had humiliated me so thoroughly. I no longer had even a shred of love left for Luke.
Do you not care what happens to me? What kind of wife are you?
Luke conveniently referred to me as his wife, but he was the one who had handed me the divorce papers. I had already submitted the divorce papers, and now that we were nothing more than strangers, demanding that I donate blood was completely unreasonable.
Please, I'm begging you. If you don't help me,
Luke's voicemails grew increasingly desperate and weak. He probably never imagined that the woman he had belittled and betrayed would now hold his life in her hands. Even as he cried and begged, my heart didn't waver. I couldn't forgive Luke for his betrayal with Jessica. Whatever happened to him was no longer any concern of mine. On top of the incessantly ringing calls, Ashley and David also started calling. At first, I decided not to answer and just listen to the voicemails.
It's your duty as Luke's wife to help him.
After taking in a defective wife, you repay us with betrayal. Do you really think a part-time worker with a measly income can afford to lose the breadwinner?
However, Ashley's outrageous remarks finally pushed me to pick up the phone. With all due respect, don't you think you're misunderstanding something? Luke, the breadwinner? You're speaking without knowing the facts. I couldn't stay silent after hearing Luke being called the breadwinner. The truth was, Luke's entire paycheck had become his personal spending money, while I was the one covering all our household expenses every month.
That's nonsense. There's no way that could be true.
Oh, really? If you think I'm lying, would you like to see the monthly credit card statements? I'm sure you'd be quite shocked.
Don't get so full of yourself just because you work part-time. Stop lying about paying the bills.
Well, for your information, I'm now working full-time. I had no choice but to get a full-time position to cover the deficits every month. All thanks to Luke's debts.
Full-time? You?
Since they had always looked down on me, they couldn't believe that I was the one primarily supporting our household. But regardless of whether they believed it, it was the truth. Without my desperate efforts to transition from part-time to full-time, we would have been drowning in debt long ago. By the way, the money Luke sent you as remittances? That was all from my earnings. Luke had been sending money to them to keep up appearances, but he only used his own income at the beginning. Once his credit card bills started piling up, I ended up being the one to cover those payments. Ashley and David fell silent, either unable to process what I had said or too shocked by the truth about Luke. Seeing no point in continuing the conversation, I hung up the phone. Tired of the endless calls from every direction, I turned off my phone. It infuriated me how everyone demanded things from me without caring about my situation. There were many things I needed to think about, but for now, I just wanted to rest. Since I couldn't relax at home, I decided to go to my parents' house. Thankfully, it was only about a 30-minute drive away. When I arrived, I heard arguing coming from inside. It was my dad and Jessica's voices.
Dad, you have to convince Michelle. If she doesn't help, Luke will be in serious trouble.
Why are you, who isn't even his spouse, saying this?
My dad sounded confused. Sorry, but I have no intention of donating blood. As I stepped into the room, Jessica immediately lashed out at me.
What are you doing? Get to the hospital now, you heartless woman.
What's going on? I can't make sense of this. Explain everything clearly.
I told my dad everything about Luke's surgery and Jessica's affair with him.
Hey, did you really have to say all that?
Jessica shrieked hysterically, clearly unprepared for me to expose everything.
What? You cheated on your husband with Luke?
As expected, my dad was furious when he learned about Jessica's relationship with Luke. Jessica's husband was a manager for one of my dad's company's key clients. Eager to marry into wealth, Jessica had willingly tied the knot but had been having an affair with Luke behind the scenes. Although Jessica confidently said she would get divorced easily if her infidelity were to be exposed, it would cause a significant blow to my dad's business.
Are you trying to disgrace me? I won't allow you to get a divorce.
I can marry whoever I want. I found true love.
Jessica seemed completely enamored with her relationship with Luke.
If that's how you feel, then do whatever you want. But don't ever come back here again. I disown you.
My dad firmly shut her down. Jessica, however, seemed delighted, as if her stance had been validated.
You don't have to tell me twice. I'm going to build a happy home with Luke. Goodbye.
Throwing out those parting words, Jessica walked out. Not long after, a compatible blood donor was fortunately found, and Luke's surgery went smoothly. The donor turned out to be Luke's uncle, Edward, but this brought its own set of complications for Luke.
You owe your life to me. Remember that.
Edward was Luke's boss at work, and he began leveraging his position to assign Luke the most difficult tasks, reminding him of the favor. At first, Luke reluctantly complied, but the unreasonable demands eventually pushed him to his breaking point, and he resigned. After being discharged from the hospital, Luke reportedly married Jessica right away, but his resignation marked the beginning of an unhappy newlywed life for the two of them.
You quit your job. How are we supposed to survive now?
What choice did I have? If I'd stayed there, they would have kept exploiting me. Don't worry, I'll find a new job soon.
But Luke's plans didn't pan out, and he struggled to find new employment. This was actually due to behind-the-scenes efforts by my dad and Jessica's ex-husband. Luke was rejected at the application screening stage, not even making it to interviews, which must have left him feeling increasingly desperate. He applied to any job he could find, regardless of the industry, but still failed to secure a single offer. Losing all motivation, Luke eventually became a shut-in. At first, Jessica supported him by taking on a night job, but constant arguments erupted as Luke showed no signs of seeking work.
Hey, when are you going to start working again?
What can I do? No one will hire me.
This isn't how it was supposed to be. I should have stayed married to my ex.
Had she not had the affair and stayed married to her ex-husband, Jessica would have had a much easier life. She finally realized that she had thrown away a stable life for a fleeting emotion, but by then, it was far too late. Though she had once declared to my dad that she had found true love, Jessica and Luke's relationship quickly grew cold. Their once fiery romance ended in a massive fight, leading to a breakup. Their marriage lasted only a few months. After breaking up with Luke and losing her source of income, Jessica turned to my dad for help, but he slammed the door in her face.
I only have one daughter. Get out of here immediately.
Please, help me, Dad. I'm begging you.
Crying and apologizing outside the house, Jessica pleaded for forgiveness. But my dad refused to forgive her for destroying my family and selfishly divorcing her husband. Seeing that my dad wouldn't budge, Jessica had no choice but to leave in defeat. Later, she reportedly went through a series of relationships with unreliable men. But at some point, she called me, excited to announce she was marrying a wealthy man.
My life may have been ruined because of you, but now I'm finally winning. Aren't you jealous?
I was stunned at her lack of remorse. But sometime later, it turned out that Jessica's new husband was actually a con artist. Jessica had been spending most of her income from her job in the nightlife industry on him. But as soon as marriage talks began, he vanished. She lost all her savings and was left completely broke. It was a miserable outcome, but perhaps now she truly understood the pain of being betrayed by someone she trusted. As for Luke, he turned to Ashley and David for help and moved back in with them. However, his return put a financial strain on their savings-based lifestyle. They reportedly sighed in frustration, wondering when Luke would leave. Luke managed to get hired for a temporary cleaning job, the only position he was offered. However, his income was significantly lower than before, and with his habitual overspending, he showed little intention of cutting back. Luke eventually began accumulating debt instead of savings, and Ashley and David started using their savings to pay off the monthly interest on his loans. Their financial situation quickly spiraled, and they were eventually forced to sell their house.
Because of you, we had to sell our home. You idiot son.
I'm sorry. I'll change and work harder from now on. I promise.
They ended up moving into a rundown, cramped public housing unit. Ashley and David had once been eager for a grandchild, but it's unlikely they'll ever see that day. Luke, a dependent and reckless spender, now has very slim chances of ever marrying again. After my divorce from Luke, I was determined to remain single. convinced that I was done with relationships for good. However, after becoming single, I took up a new hobby, hiking, and I met Jacob through a hiking club. We quickly bonded and eventually decided to get married. Although I had developed a distrust of men for a while, Jacob patiently supported me, saying he would stay by my side until my emotional wounds healed. Shortly after we got married, I discovered I was pregnant. It was surprising since I hadn't been able to conceive for years before. I couldn't help but wonder if Luke had been the reason for our infertility all along. Later, after fulfilling my dream of giving birth to our first child, I was walking through town with Jacob and our baby when I noticed Ashley, David, and Luke across the street. The three of them, dressed in shabby clothes, didn't notice me. They walked hunched over with gloomy expressions, disappearing down the street. They didn't look happy at all. I shuddered to think about what my life might have been like if I had stayed with Luke. In fact, I began to feel that I might have been lucky that Jessica's affair allowed me to sever ties with those awful people.
Something wrong? You're zoning out.
Jacob noticed me staring in the direction the three had disappeared. No, nothing. Let's go. Though I had been betrayed by my first husband, I felt certain that with Jacob, I could build a happy family. Holding the tiny life in my arms tightly, I walked forward again with Jacob by my side.